Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take sources, we break them down, we give you the insights. Today, we are jumping into Daniel Cappello's book, The Ivy League. Our mission, to really get under the skin of the mystique, the influence, the whole legacy of these 8 big names. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Dartmouth, Brown, Cornell, and Penn. Cappello's book isn't like a super dense academic text. Think more cultural monograph. It blends histories, anecdotes, intellectual vibes, gives you a real feel for them. So ready to unpack this whole Ivy League thing.
Absolutely. And what strikes you right away reading Cappello is how that term Ivy League has just grown. It started out, just an athletic thing back in the 20th century. But Cappello shows how it's become this, massive sociocultural brand. It means way more than just sports now, wouldn't you say?
Oh, totally. You hear Ivy League and instantly pictures pop up, right?
Huh.
Those classic campus spires, leaves turning in the fall, maybe the whole tweed blazer look. It's an aesthetic, this idea of the best and the brightest. Cappello really hammers home how it went from sports to this symbol of privilege, ambition. National aspiration almost. Quite the branding exercise, huh? Its symbolic power is a huge takeaway right off the bat.
It really is. And it says a lot about how symbols work, doesn't it? Even the ivy itself, the plant suggests age, tradition, something established. Cappello connects these visual cues, this whole cultural package, to building that aura. Why did the athletic part become such a strong brand, though? Maybe it taps into that whole competition, tradition thing, projects this image of, well-rounded excellence.
Yeah, good point. Okay, let's rewind a bit. Where did it all start? Cappello goes into the origins. And these weren't just random colleges. We're talking colonial colleges, like the birth of American elitism, basically. Harvard, way back in 1636. Yale, 1701. Princeton, 1746. They were among the first higher ed places in America. And their job, initially, Cappello lays it out, mostly training ministers and future leaders.
Yeah, that's crucial. They look to the British model, Oxford, Cambridge, but as Cappello notes, they adapted it for this new republic. And their role was significant right from the start. He calls them an incubator for American aristocracy. That phrase really sticks. Think about what that early exclusivity means for today. Debates about meritocracy, social structures, it all connects back.
Right. Incubator for American aristocracy. Wow. It wasn't about access for everyone. It was about cultivating a specific class. And look who was going. Mostly white. Protestant guys. The curriculum. Super classical. Latin, Greek, theology, moral philosophy. You can see the goal was churning out statesmen and ministers. Very different from today's focus, huh? So that initial exclusivity really set the path for the schools and for society.
Exactly. It raises big questions about, the roots of American elitism. Cappello acknowledges the exclusionary side, definitely. But he also credits them within that context for laying intellectual groundwork for American identity, emphasizing scholarship, moral character. It's complicated, right? Contributions and biases right from the beginning.
Definitely complex. And speaking of legacy, Cappello really gets into the feel of these places. The cultural capital, it's not just books, it's the whole environment. Starting with the buildings themselves. Those impressive Gothic quads, the red brick halls, bell towers, tree-lined courtyards. They just scream history, importance.
And Cappello argues that symbolism is totally intentional, projecting order, permanence, scholarly virtue. He even breaks down the styles: Yale's collegiate Gothic, Princeton's Romanesque, Harvard's Georgian red brick. He connects these looks to the school's personalities. It's not just pretty architecture, it's messaging. Like collegiate Gothic, those high arches meant to evoke awe, connect to old European learning centers. It's deliberate.
And it's way more than just buildings, isn't it? Cappello talks about the intangible stuff, too. The traditions, the atmosphere, Harvard's hasty pudding club, Princeton's eating clubs, lawn parties, convocations, rowing regattas. It's all part of this unique Ivy tapestry. And then there's Ivy style. Cappello points out it's not just tweed jackets and boat shoes. It's unspoken codes, confident reserve, cultivated intelligence, attachment to legacy. That style projects values, tradition, intellect, even if sometimes it's just performative.
Precisely. It signals belonging to a certain world, understanding the unwritten rules. And that whole cultivated atmosphere, as Cappello shows, reinforces that sense of exclusivity, that shared identity among alumni. It's powerful.
Okay, but these places haven't just stayed the same, obviously. Cappello traces how they evolved. From small classical learning centers to these, global research giants. Their influence now is massive. Government, finance, law, science, media, arts. Everywhere.
Critical point. And while Cappello generally seems appreciative, he does point out contradictions. He notes they've produced way more senators and CEOs than, say, social reformers challenging the system, which makes you ask, Who do these elite places ultimately serve? What kind of leaders do they tend to create?
Yeah, and Cappello highlights the big shifts over time, too. Admitting women, the move towards merit-based admissions, diversifying the student body, though that's still ongoing, right? It's this constant tension, holding on to tradition while trying to adapt to a changing world.
Absolutely. Key turning points he identifies. The GI Bill after WWII, huge change, open doors. The Cold War, pushing scientific excellence. The 60 student protests, challenging everything. And now, this 21st century push for global competitiveness, all these things shape them. They've kind of rebranded, haven't they? From East Coast Protestant strongholds to more cosmopolitan hubs, while still keeping that exclusive feel.
And it's wild how that aura extends way beyond just education now. Cappello talks a lot about the Ivy League as a lifestyle brand. You see it in Ralph Lauren ads, the whole preppy fashion thing. That Ivy look is sold globally, often to people with zero connection to the actual schools.
Yeah, that ironic interplay, as Cappello calls it, is fascinating. The serious intellectual side versus this aesthetic consumption. It's like the Ivy image sells this fantasy of class, taste, timelessness, even if you never went there. What parts of that model do you think travel so well internationally? Why the global appeal?
Well, it's not just fashion, is it? Cappello mentions the global reach in other ways. International admissions are huge now. They attract talent from everywhere. And then you see Ivy grads in top positions globally, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, D.C., sure, but also everywhere else.
That global export really highlights the perceived value, the prestige attached to an Ivy degree. It says a lot about how these few schools built and kept such a powerful worldwide reputation for excellence.
So as Cappello wraps up, he tackles the current tensions, these contradictions in the 21st century. How do these traditional, historically exclusive places deal with demands for more inclusion, accessibility, accountability? It's a core question, isn't it? How do you square being elite with democratic ideals?
Critical questions. And Cappello, while ultimately positive about their value, doesn't ignore the problems. He suggests that, despite flaws in history, they still function as this aspirational model, not just for U.S. higher ed, but globally, like this image of what excellence looks like.
Okay, so wrapping up our deep dive into Cappello's The Ivy League. We've seen how these 8 schools went from colonial training grounds to these huge sociocultural brands representing elite education, tradition, massive influence, globally even. Cappello's book, maybe not a deep academic critique, but it really paints a picture. The history, the style, the mythology, makes it accessible, but still feel authoritative. It gives you a real sense of why they loom so large in the American imagination and increasingly the world's.
Exactly. And as a cultural artifact itself, the book blending history, style, commentary, institutional narrative, it's a great starting point for understanding the power and prestige of the Ivy League. Not the final word, maybe, but a really engaging and thought-provoking overview.
So here's something to maybe mull over. Given their long, complicated history and the challenges they face now, what does this persistent global fascination with the Ivy League really tell us about what society values, what we aspire to when it comes to education and, well, success? Definitely food for thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.